So you heard I'm from San Francisco, so I could get different responses being from San Francisco. And being from San Francisco, when you go places, it can surface the incredible division and polarization that we have in our country right now, because I'm from there. So I experienced that actually last week when I was with my family in Colorado. And so one of my family members got a piece of mail with "This is the return address, Nancy Pelosi." And so they took the piece of mail, threw it across the table at me and said, "You can read it, it's from your Pelosi." And so I don't actually claim Nancy as my Pelosi. I don't claim any politician as my politician. But, you know, and we hadn't even been talking politics. I was actually fairly intentional about that. But it's just right in the air we breathe, and all around us is this incredible division and polarization. I would imagine you've experienced it. Maybe not, I don't know if it's in your family, but just turn on the television. If you haven't, just go read the headlines. It's all over the place, right? And so, and it's been very evident with the impeachment trial a few weeks back. And one of the things I was struck with as I was observing that was how both sides, Democrats and Republicans, use the Constitution, which is supposed to be the founding document that unites us, to divide us, right? They had different interpretations. You put the two together, they can't both be true, because they really don't, they just can't. But they use the same founding document to do that. And so how do we live? How do we be the church? How do we be disciples of Jesus in such an incredibly polarized and divided world that we're in right now? And so I want to offer to you this morning that we are called as individuals and the people of God. Our primary allegiance is not to Democrats or Republicans. Our primary allegiance is to Jesus. And Jesus has called us to be this alternative society, this new politics that others can see and be like, wow, that is really good news, and we want to be a part of that. And so, and Roy and I have experienced this. It's a remarkable thing that a pastor from San Francisco is speaking to a congregation in Naples. Someone from the home of Nancy Pelosi is from what Roy tells me, Trump comes here to raise money. So, that's happening because of the gospel, right? And so, a lot of commentators point to the Sermon on the Mount as our constitution as the people of God, as our constitution as the church. So, if we want to know who are we as individuals and as a church, who are we to be? What are we to embody? We can listen to the Sermon on the Mount, and I know you've been listening to the Sermon on the Mount, right, as a church. And so before we get into the Sermon on the Mount, I just want to notice the first verse of Matthew 5 introduces this beautiful sermon of Jesus and the Beatitudes. Beatitudes are like the preamble of our Constitution. It's like what frames the whole thing. Jesus, what does he do? He goes up on a mountain and he sits down. So back then, going up, sitting down would be like getting behind a pulpit. It was the position of authority to speak the word of God. And he goes up on a mountain, and that's important. Important things happen in mountains in Scripture. So if somebody's on a mountain, pay attention. Something important is going to happen, or at least dramatic, right? So we just heard, this is Transfiguration Sunday, and we just heard the story of the Transfiguration happened on a mountain, right, where Jesus clearly proclaimed as God's son to fulfill all that Moses and Elijah had pointed to. And so Matthew's being pretty intentional by telling us Jesus is going on a mountain and to give this word. And he's pointing back to Exodus, which we heard. He's pointing back to Moses going on the mountain and receiving the law from God. And when we think about the law that Moses received, sometimes folks call that the Ten Commandments. When we think about the Sermon on the Mount and what you've been hearing about, kind of all the different ways Jesus tells us to live, sometimes we can have a kind of a small view of what's happening here, because a lot of it can come, if we think about how the world around us, the culture around us thinks about law, it's pretty small. It's more basically just protecting us from our enemies, keeping us safe, right? And the Sermon on the Mount and what was given to us on the Mount Sinai is so much bigger and so much better and so just more beautiful than that. And part of how we enter into that is we enter into the framing of these laws, this way that we are supposed to live. And how are the Ten Commandments or the law framed? The first verse right before we're told the Ten Commandments is, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. They are framed by our deliverance. They are framed by this incredibly gracious act of God to rescue us, to rescue God's people from slavery, from oppression, and step into living as a free people. And so the commandments are really more, this is what it means to be free. This is what it means to live as a delivered people. This is what it looks like, step into that. And then on the Sermon on the Mount, how does Jesus start this picture of this constitution of who we are to be as people? Blessed are, blessed are, blessed are. This word of God's incredible just outpouring of gracious goodness. Other translations of this are congratulations. Like, this is really good news. This is who you are. Get ready. Get ready. Good news. Here it comes. And happy are they. So both start with God's act of deliverance. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is going up the mountain. He's saying, I am the Messiah. I am your deliverer. And I have come to deliver you not just from a Pharaoh, whatever power you might feel like is pressing you down at this point. I am here to deliver you from the greatest power of sin and death and evil. You want to know what it looks like to live as a delivered people that is not ruled by those powers? I'm going to tell you. You ready to hear? Well, to be ready to hear that, we actually need to hear what the culture around us tells us is blessed, what they congratulate us for, what they tell us is happiness, okay? Because we're always mixed and muddled. There's no way not to be from the water that we swim in. So what are we congratulated for usually? You go to a Hallmark, buy a card, what are you congratulated for? Usually it's graduation, getting a new job. Sometimes it's a baby or wedding. I'm always a little confused by those because I'm like, I don't know what I did to be congratulated for. I mean, this was a gift, right? But most congratulations have to do much more with something that we achieved, something that we worked hard for. So like good job for your hard work, congratulations. You graduated from high school, or you graduated from college, or you got promoted, right? And so what we congratulate each other for, what we celebrate in each other often is our hard work, our way that we've kind of made our own way, that we've carved out a spot for us, right? And when we think about happiness, this is super overview, but I think we do think about the American dream, which is to have a nice job so we can have a nice house, so we can have a nice family, so we can have a nice vacations and eventually a nice retirement, okay? And then if you put those two things together, really what we're surrounded by is a culture that says if you work hard, you will have a happy life. So if you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, you will have this happy life. If you, the Bible that is not my Bible, but I've been heard that there's a verse in it that says God helps those who help themselves. Like that is kind of the basis for congratulations. Like we help ourselves, we're self-sufficient, we step into this happy life. That's what we're surrounded by. But what ends up happening when you live that story is we basically become living in a very small world that's just all about our own self-interest. And we actually see that on our bigger stage when we think about the division in our country. Both parties point back to American self-interest. Both parties justify whatever they're doing, whatever they're saying, and people are like, oh yeah, that's okay because it's an American self-interest, okay? Politicians will say they should get reelected. Because it's in the country's self-interest, for their self-interest to be reelected, like it's all good somehow, right? So, I mean, there's just this cycle that we're trapped in of self-interest. And we work hard, and in that, we really, there's some good intention in there. We want to make a good, safe place for our families and our kids and those we love. But the way that we're told we need to do that is to use whatever resources and power we have for our own self-interest, right? So, what's our Beatitudes? Blessed are those who work hard. Blessed are the self-sufficient. Blessed are those who help themselves. Blessed are those that can be congratulated for doing that. And if you can't do that, you are not blessed. So into that context, listen to Jesus. Listen to his good news, because he says, oh, I forgot to do this part. Sorry, I'm going to go back. Let me tell you from my context, just an example of the worldview I just talked about living itself out. So this is a headline from the New York Times. So in my context, our public school system 18 years ago decided not to have your school assigned by the neighborhood you lived in. So instead, it's an open lottery, anybody can go to any school. Sounds like a good idea, and it was good intentioned, because the intention was that the kids with less privilege would actually get to go to the coveted schools and get a better education. So that was the hope. So what's happened? Well, applying to kindergarten has become like a full-time job for some families. Like they go and visit 12 to 15 schools, like trying to figure out what's going to be the best school for their kid, because they got to make sure they set up everything for their kid okay if they're going to make it in this American dream that we just talked about. And they fill out the form and they work the system and to try and get the top schools. Well, what's happened? Our city school district is more segregated along lines of rich and poor and ethnically than it was when we started this 15 years ago. And that's not just true in San Francisco, that's true across the nation. Look at the stats. We're actually more segregated now than we were in the 70s. Why? Because we all live out what I just said. We're not immune to it, including myself. Like, parents in San Francisco, including myself, is like, where's my kid gonna go to school? I gotta think about this, and is it gonna be okay for them? And what do I need to work to make this work? We're all a part of that system. We're all sucked into it. We're all sucked into a system that tells us we need to watch out for our own self-interests. It doesn't matter the cost to others, right? So there's my story for what we're not. Okay, so let's hear what Jesus says we are. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The Beatitudes frame our Constitution. Blessed are the poor in spirit frame the Beatitudes. So we want to pay attention to this first Beatitude. What does this look like? So let's work on this a little bit more. Message says, congratulations, you who are at the end of your rope. Ever heard that on a Hallmark card? You ever go up to somebody, oh, you're at the end of your rope, congratulations, good news, I'm so glad for you. Because with less of you, there's more of God, right? And I would encourage you, as I'm preaching, allow actually places you're at the end of your rope to surface. And allow God to speak into those, maybe in a different way. This is AA's, Alcoholics Anonymous' first step. And I would say we are blessed if we can take this step. Blessed are those who see they are powerless over their own addictions and their lives become unmanageable. Jesus says you are blessed. And this is from Thomas Long. So that individually we're blessed when we're desperate and poor, as well as corporately. Blessed are those who are pushed to the edge of society, who are trampled down or forgotten by the systems that do not work for them. That's who Jesus says is blessed. This should be jarring to us. This is the opposite of who we say are blessed. So let's pay attention as he fills this out. The rest of the Beatitudes fill out what he's saying here. Congratulations, you mourners! Blessed are you who lament the brokenness of the world around you, of your own family, of your city. Blessed are you. Because when you share in God's broken heart, God himself embraces you with his comfort. Congratulations, you meek! Another great Hallmark card. Blessed are you when you don't elbow each other aside to make sure you get what you need, but instead you patiently wait because you trust that God will act. God will act for justice for you and for the larger in his due time. The whole earth belongs to you. Congratulations, you who are hungry and thirsty. Blessed are you when you long for what is right and you ache for right relationships, because God himself is coming to fill you up, and he is the best food and the best drink that you will ever, ever have. And you won't know that until you're hungry and thirsty. Congratulations, merciful. Blessed are you when you're more eager to forgive than punish, and when you are generous with your enemies, because God is just like that to you. And when you do this, you receive who he is. Congratulations, pure in heart. When you look like you have it together and you're following all the rules, you're actually not blessed. It's when you allow yourself to be desperate enough that you have to work on your inside and outside and have them become whole. Then you are put right and you will see God himself. Congratulations, peacemakers. Blessed are you when you imitate your Father in heaven, and you work to halt wars among the nations and reconcile with your mother and father, sister and brother, husband or wife. Blessed are you, because you shine forth the reality that you are God's children in a war-torn world. Blessed are you. Congratulations, persecuted. Why? Because, you're actually not in a good place when people speak well of you and are nice to you all around. Because basically you're just functioning in the systems of the society around you, and they are coming to an end. So, when you are loyal to Jesus, you'll threaten those systems. You will threaten those powers, and they will try and get rid of you. You're in good company. Rejoice. Be glad. They've done this for a long time. To all the prophets that came before you, to Jesus himself. My new society, which is free from those greatest powers, belongs to you. My kingdom is yours. So, I actually want to end by telling you a story from my context of how, as I would put it, embracing your desperation, embracing your poverty of spirit, whether that's on an individual level, a family level, corporate level, church level, whatever level it is, that's the gateway into Jesus' kingdom. That's your green card if you want to join his people. So I'm just going to tell you a series, kind of a long story from my context of how this has happened. So this is my family. It's my husband, Danny, my son, Aiden, who's 12, my son, Brendan, is 20, almost 21, my daughter, Patty's 18, and me. And this is not San Francisco, but it's beautiful place we went. And my kids, along with a number of other families, we actually chose back when my oldest was going to kindergarten, so that's like 15, 16 years ago, that we were not going to work the system, that we were not going to participate in that because of what we had heard from Jesus in the gospel. So we were going to put our kids in our local elementary school where we lived. It's walking distance from my house, and it wasn't hard to do because that one's not hard to get into. And so my kids, my oldest kids, their elementary, middle, and high school have all been predominantly non-white, low-performing, lower socioeconomic schools. And so I'm just going to tell you a story from the elementary school that all three of them went to, which is right here. That's a nice picture, I'll tell you about in a minute. Monroe Elementary School. And it was such a gift that this school had Spanish immersion program, which we weren't actually looking for, but ended up being a gift to us, so my kids got to learn Spanish. And we had the incredible gift of becoming dear friends with Mexican-American, Salvadorian-American, Honduran-American folks that were in our school and that we've known now for at least 15 years. And a lot of them are undocumented. And so we were able to just have the deep privilege and honor of being invited into their desperation. What is it like to be an undocumented person, even in San Francisco, which is a sanctuary city? And so that's a picture of our kids' camp. So these families were part of our kids' camp, our youth ministry. We had a Spanish-speaking Bible study with the moms. We have a long relationship together. We watch each other's kids that get going on. Anyway, so what happened was, I don't know, about 4 or 5 years into our friendship, one of the husbands of one of the families got picked up by ICE. And so the wife called in desperation, and he was put in this detention center, which is thankfully driving distance. It's in the Bay Area. And so I actually had not before visited a jail. I had not had the honor of living that out when Jesus says, when you visit me in jail, you visit me. I had not yet had that honor. And so we found out that within 24 hours you have to get your name on a list or nobody can visit. And none of his family felt okay doing that because they're also undocumented, so that would be a scary thing to do. So myself and another member of our church, Chiming, got on the list and were able to visit him. Within a few weeks, we heard that they were going to move him out of state, which is a big deal, because if you're moved out of state, you lose all legal help that you have in contact with your family. So it's really not a good thing to happen. And so, again, in desperation, working with his wife, we gathered money from our school community and our church for his bail. And I distinctly remember being, again, and this was done with Qiming and I because the rest of his family was afraid. They couldn't go down to the offices and do this kind of thing. And so I'd never done any of this before, but went down to the offices you need to go to. I had an envelope of $5,000 worth of cash. And I remember literally running in downtown San Francisco to Wells Fargo to get a cashier's check so I could run back in time to get all the documentation signed, the bail's in my name, so that he could be released and not be moved to another facility, which would basically probably have meant that he would be deported. So this is one family and the desperation we were invited into. Another family, the father of that family was actually murdered on the main street of my neighborhood. And never really have known what happened, nor has that been pursued. There's, in both situations, all kinds of opportunity to hunger and thirst for righteousness and justice. And that family, I remember going to the wife's home where there was just folks from our community crying out to God. And what I want to now tell in the stories is the places where invitation into these folks' lives was invitation into the gospel and invitation into the Beatitudes and experiencing them in a very concrete and real way. Into their desperation was gateway for us. And the way that they honored us and allowed that to happen. So I remember going into her house. She saw me and invited me into her bedroom. And we sat on her bed. My Spanish isn't great, so it's not like I can do a lot of pastoring in Spanish. But I just took hold of her hand, and we sat there and wept and mourned. And I have never experienced the concrete presence of Christ so clearly. It's like he was physically in the room embracing us. Blessed are those who mourn. They will be comforted. And then these two women are meek. They did not seek revenge. They did not seek vengeance. They do not elbow other people aside. They patiently wait because they trust their God, that he will act in their due time. Both of them have been a model to this of me of what does it look like to be meek. Not in a kind of flabby, weak way, but in a very powerfully trusting God way. And what does it look like to hunger and thirst for righteousness? To just deeply ache and long for rightness in relationships, in society, in the world around us. We actually, the man who was picked up by ICE, it's been an 8 or 9 year process, and just last year he was given legal status. It was a miracle, because we went in the courtroom, the judge looked like she was going to just write it all off. And then we went out and prayed, and we went back in, and she gave him status. But part of why he got status was because his son was mugged. And if you have a crime committed against your family, you can get a certain kind of visa. And so the wife said, see, what people meant for, she's quoting Joseph in the Bible, what others meant for harm, God will use for good. God will act in his due time. It took 8 years, but God did. And God doesn't act all the same in all the different ways, but he did. And what an honor and what a privilege for us to enter into the gateway to the kingdom through these families and the Beatitudes lived out in their lives. And one other way that this has happened is both of them at different times were evicted from the apartments where they lived. In San Francisco, there's something called rent control. So when you rent somewhere, it can only go up by a small percentage each year. So if you rented somewhere 2 decades ago, it's going to be way, like, third cheaper than it is now, or even less because of our crazy housing thing. So the family whose husband was murdered got evicted right at about the same time that a member of our congregation was moving closer to our church. And he decided with us, rather than sell his home for a lot of money, he decided to rent to this family in partnership with another Ecclesia Project church, Grace Fellowship. They helped get a grant way below market rate. They still live there. And it's been this wonderful partnership of renovating the house and all the stuff they've done together. The second family was evicted just a couple years ago. Same thing. They wouldn't be able to live in the city. It's just a regular rent. And same thing, another family in our church had some folks move out of their downstairs unit. And the woman had basically watched a lot of our kids and were close friends. So it just was almost natural for her to just move in, and they live there now. And so the kingdom of God is coming on earth as it is in heaven. The San Francisco housing market is not the most powerful power. Jesus is. And when we step into our desperation and others' desperation, we can be given a gateway, a green card into his new society and experience it for ourselves. And so I would just invite all of you, in whatever places where you are experiencing desperation, it might be on a personal level, family level, whatever level, embrace it as blessing from God, as a gateway, as an opening to experience Jesus himself and experience his kingdom coming here in Naples as it is in heaven. And we're about to enter into Lent on Wednesday. And that's one of the great gifts of Lent, isn't it? Is we're actually invited into our desperation to see our sin, to create space for that. So if you don't feel desperate, it doesn't take very much to get there if you just pay attention to what's going on around you or yourself. So let yourself do that. Let yourself make that first step of, in Lent, we sometimes fast, right? And as soon as you fast, you will discover that you have some addiction that is out of control and has made your life unmanageable. Let yourself get to that point and cry out to God and find him coming and embracing you and seeing him as individuals and as a people.